Welcome back to EtherLink AI Insights. I'm Alex, and today we're diving into something that's reshaping how enterprises operate across Europe right now. We're talking about agentic AI and autonomous agents, and specifically how Amsterdam is becoming the epicenter for this transformation in 2026. Sam, thanks for joining me.
Great to be here, Alex. And what's striking about Amsterdam's position right now is that it's not just about the technology, it's about the governance framework that's forcing enterprises to actually think clearly about how they deploy these systems. This is a fundamentally different era than the chatbot wave we saw just a couple years ago.
Exactly. So let's set the stage. When we talk about agentic AI in 2026, what are we really describing here? Because I think a lot of listeners might still be thinking about chatbots that answer customer service questions.
That's the key distinction. Chatbots were reactive. You ask them something, they respond. Autonomous agents, they operate independently, executing complex workflows, making judgment calls, escalating decisions. Think of an agent that autonomously processes invoice disputes, flags compliance risks, and manages exceptions without waiting for human input. A financial services firm in Amsterdam actually deployed exactly this and saw a 67% reduction in manual processing time with 94% accuracy on regulatory classifications.
That's a massive jump in efficiency. But with that autonomy comes a question. How do you govern systems that are making decisions on their own? That's where the governance piece becomes critical, right?
Absolutely. Traditional AI governance assumes humans are watching every decision point, but autonomous agents operate in gray zones. They're blending data analysis with business logic, making judgment calls that don't fit neatly into a checkbox. Amsterdam's enterprises are now racing to build explainability layers, comprehensive audit trails, and human-in-the-loop escalation protocols. Without those, you're flying blind.
And the statistics back this up. I'm looking at McKinsey's 2026 AI State of the Union here. 73% of European enterprises now deploy autonomous agents in finance, legal, and supply chain operations. That's a stunning jump from just 28% in 2024. So within about 18 months, the adoption rate more than doubled.
That acceleration tells you something important. Enterprises see competitive pressure. If your competitor is automating invoice processing or contract review, you can't afford to stay behind. But here's where it gets interesting. The real competitive moat isn't just having the agent. It's having a domain-specific model that's better than the generic tools everyone else is using.
Now, that's a concept I want to dig into. Domain-specific language models, or DSLMs. This is the idea that a model trained specifically on, say, legal precedent or financial regulations is going to outperform ChatGPT, right?
Vastly outperform it, actually. Gartner's research from 2026 shows that legal DSLMs, trained on EU legislation, case law, and regulatory precedent, outperform GPT-based systems on contract analysis by 34%. That's not a marginal improvement. That's a fundamental difference in capability. A Dutch legal tech firm I mentioned reduced contract review cycles from 48 hours down to 6 hours using a proprietary DSLM trained on 10 years of case law.
But those models are expensive, aren't they? This isn't something every firm can just throw together in a weekend.
Exactly. We're talking $2 to $5 million per deployment. It's a significant investment, but here's the business logic. You're embedding competitive advantage into the model itself. A financial DSLM trained on Basel III compliance, market microstructure, and portfolio optimization delivers precision that generic models simply can't match. Amsterdam's fintech clusters and logistics hubs are treating these as strategic assets.
So we have autonomous agents becoming standard, DSLMs becoming the new competitive advantage, and then there's this third piece of the puzzle, the EU AI Act. This came into effect August 2nd, 2026, right? And that's not just a compliance checkbox.
It's a complete inversion of how enterprises think about risk. The August deadline transformed compliance from optional to mandatory for high-risk systems, anything touching fundamental rights, employment decisions, law enforcement. You need documented risk assessments, bias audits, human oversight protocols. Fail to comply? Fines up to 6% of global revenue. That's not a slap on the wrist.
But here's what fascinates me, and correct me if I'm reading this right. Compliant enterprises actually gained a competitive advantage. Boston Consulting Group found they had a 4.2-year competitive advantage over non-compliant competitors in enterprise deal cycles. That's counterintuitive, right? You'd think compliance would be a drag.
It's not counterintuitive at all once you think about it. Compliance forces clarity. When you go through the process of documenting what your autonomous agents are doing, why they're doing it, and who's accountable when they fail, you actually understand your systems better. That clarity breeds trust with regulators, with customers, with your board of directors, and trust is currency in enterprise deals.
So you're saying the enterprises that embraced governance early now have a structural advantage. They know their systems work. They can demonstrate it to customers. They've de-risked the deployment, whereas companies that tried to skirt compliance are now scrambling.
Exactly, and it gets more interesting when you combine this with DSLMs. An enterprise with a compliant DSLM that's been bias audited and documented becomes incredibly attractive to risk-averse buyers. You've essentially turned governance into a feature, not a burden.
This is all happening in Amsterdam specifically, and I think that's worth noting. Why is Amsterdam the epicenter here? Is it just geography, or is there something about Dutch tech culture?
It's a combination. You have regulatory clarity. The Netherlands takes EU directives seriously, so enterprises have legal certainty. You have proximity to EU regulators and policymakers, so there's a feedback loop. But honestly, it's also about pragmatism. Dutch enterprises are used to operating in regulated environments. Financial services, logistics, legal, these sectors have dealt with compliance for decades. So the shift to governance-first AI felt natural rather than revolutionary.
And EtherLink, your consultancy, is helping enterprises navigate this transition. Can you walk us through what that actually looks like? What does an enterprise do when they're trying to architect a governance-first autonomous system?
The AI lead architecture framework we use starts with clarity on risk. What decisions is your agent making? Which ones touch fundamental rights or regulatory thresholds? From there, you map accountability. Who owns the decision? Who audits it? What's the escalation path? Then you engineer it. That's where explainability layers and audit trails aren't bolted on afterward. They're built into the system from day one.
So it's not about checking a compliance box at the end. It's about designing compliance into the architecture from the start.
Correct. And that changes everything. Because once compliance is architected in, it becomes cheaper to maintain. The alternative, retrofitting governance, is exponentially more expensive and usually reveals problems you didn't know you had.
For leaders and teams trying to wrap their heads around this transformation, what's the biggest mindset shift they need to make?
The biggest one? Move from thinking about AI as a technology deployment to thinking about it as an organizational capability. Autonomous agents aren't tools you hand to a department. They're capabilities that require new skill sets, new governance structures, new ways of thinking about accountability. Leaders need to embrace that this is a transformation challenge, not an IT project.
And that's where AetherTravel comes in, isn't it? This immersive leadership retreat in Finnish Lapland, designed specifically for teams navigating this autonomous future.
Exactly. The retreat is a 7-day intensive experience designed to help leaders develop a coherent vision for their autonomous AI future. It's not lectures and PowerPoints. It's immersive. You're working through real scenarios, stress testing your governance frameworks, building alignment across your organization. The Finnish Lapland setting is intentional too. You're away from the noise. You can actually think strategically about these challenges.
I appreciate that. Because this feels like it's at the inflection point. We're past the hype. We're into the real operational challenges. Enterprises are deploying autonomous agents. They're building DSLMs, but they're also realizing governance isn't optional anymore.
We're absolutely at an inflection point. The enterprises that get governance right in the next 12 months will have built structural advantages that last years. The ones that don't? They'll be retrofitting under pressure, which is always more expensive and riskier.
So to wrap up, autonomous agents are moving from 28% adoption to 73% adoption in European enterprises. Domain-specific language models are becoming the new competitive moat. EU AI Act compliance is no longer optional. It's a strategic advantage. And governance-first architecture is how you win in this environment. Sam, any final thought?
Just this. If your enterprise hasn't started thinking about autonomous agents and governance strategy, 2026 is the year to act. The window for getting ahead of this is closing fast. The good news? The path is clear, and there's strong evidence that governance-first approaches actually accelerate deployment and drive better outcomes.
Fantastic. Listeners, if you want to dive deeper into Amsterdam's AI Governance Blueprint, the full article is available on etherlink.ai. You'll find references, case studies, and more detail on how enterprises are building these systems. Thanks to Sam for the insights, and thanks to all of you for listening to EtherLink AI Insights. We'll see you next time.